Ready?
Not really. I don't know. Hang on. I think I should have done a little warm-up act.
No, we'll go straight
Because
in.
now I don't feel relaxed.
Well, this is what the people want.
Raw.
Yay.
Okay. So.
Are you prepared for today?
Well, I mean, I watched the podcast, if that's what you mean. I made some notes.
Prior to watching the podcast, what would you have scored your knowledge of bones?
1.
And now?
A little bit more than that.
So there was some progress, which is good.
Yes.
Before we get into that, This is the first of these debrief type episodes that we've done.
Yes.
So the format is going to be, we have a guest on.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sensible conversation.
Yes.
And then you and I do a debrief, which is a little bit more playful, because it's difficult to be playful with guests when they've got important information to share. So this is the more light-hearted debrief, reflections.
Do you know what I'm struggling with the most?
Go on.
Is the fact that normally...
And this one, can I put off on the table like that?
Yeah.
Okay,
fine.
Cool.
Anyway, what I am struggling with the most for this is that normally you and I talk about everything.
Everything.
Literally everything. And it's a bit like that kind of anticipation when you don't know what you're getting for your birthday, or when someone's planning a birthday party or something like that.
And you don't like surprises.
I don't like surprises.
No.
And sitting here knowing that you've got some stuff on your notes and I'm like, I'm nervous that you're going to throw me a curveball.
I am, because we've not actually shared and compared notes. We've both watched the recording back, and I was obviously there when we recorded it, but we've made our own reflections, which we are now going to share with each other for the first time.
Although I've shared with you all the things that I was going to ask you already.
Is that all you had?
That's it, yeah.
Before we get into bones, we need these kind of style of episodes they need some kind of title, don't they? Like, what is it? Otherwise, when I go to label it in the studio, we won't know, and people won't know whether, because they might love this kind of format. They're like, I need to know what that is. Give me the playful, not the sensible. You should probably watch both. But anyway, so to help with that process today, I thought that I would ask ChatGPT what it would suggest for a review show for a podcast based on the conversation that we had formerly with a guest. Mm-hmm. So the Dynamic Pursuit being the main name of the podcast. What is the follow-up session? So should I give you the options and you can choose one? Or we can go back to the drawing board?
Okay, go on, shoot. Okay. What did ChatGPT give you?
The Pursuit Review.
Ooh, okay, yes.
The Dynamic Debrief.
Somehow I kind of like that. It's a bit cheesy.
Yeah, that's super cheesy. The Pursuit Playback.
Okay.
I don't like that one.
No.
It's not done well there. The After Action Report. Sounds like some kind of like military or hospital, like paramedic.
No, I don't like that.
This is my personal favourite. The Follow Through. The Follow Through.
That's a definite. That's right at the bottom of the list there.
It's not even on the list. It doesn't even get to the bottom. When someone says the Follow Through, I'm thinking instantly about something that is not what we're doing. Hopefully you're not going to do that right now. If you are going to do that, you need to let me know so that I can pause the recording. Nobody needs to see or hear that. These chairs are not wiped clean. So I said to it, they're okay, do better. I like to have these games with ChatGPT. So it came back with the Applied Pursuit.
Okay.
Or the Dynamic Review. None of those set me on fire, so I'm going to have to go... my vote is to go back to the thinking box.
What was the first one you mentioned?
The Pursuit Review. Anyway, let's not get
anyway, I don't know. We'll have to think about that a little bit
Those are the options from ChatGPT.
Perhaps people could write in the comments some ideas or suggestions.
The only reason I shared that was because the follow-through made me laugh. I thought that was a good joke to get started with.
Okay.
Right, let's get into the review of the actual conversation with Dr. Ian Varley on... which we titled The Dynamic Pursuit of Bone Density and Discerning Bogus Research.
Yes.
Now, there are a few instant reflections that I've got, and I'm assuming that you have spent most of the week on Google Scholar, PubMed, fact-checking all of the studies that Ian mentioned, there were many studies. Have you not read any of those?
No, I didn't.
No fact-checking. That's just so people know. This is purely opinion.
Yep.
Sometimes in podcasts, people are like, "Oh, we'll put those papers in the show notes." I haven't done that. There was too many. There was a lot of.
Yeah, he gave a lot of.
Which I loved.
He cited quite a few pieces of research.
Yeah. So the first question that I've got for you is based on everything that Ian shared. Between me and you, who has got more likelihood of being affected by a bone health problem in later life? Because you've got some opinions on this. Because yours is quite interesting. Because yours covers both the nutrition aspect, the physical activity aspect, the where you grew up aspect. So who do you think, me or you? Who's got better bone health? Not as a competition.
I'm going to say that I
thought you might. State your case for your bone health supremacy.
Well, I think I grew up in South Africa, so instantly
better.
Well, there's a huge advantage,
which is
vitamin D,
the sunshine.
I did
think that when he said that about the nutritional component of vitamin D being important from a bone density perspective. I was like, people in the Northern Hemisphere are disadvantaged.
Yeah, straight away.
Because even when it's supposed to be sunny, it's often not.
Yeah, I mean, you can't even trust the weather forecast. It's that bad. But I mean, you can trust that it's most likely not going to be sunny, right? So anyway, so you should be taking vitamin D supplements.
Yeah.
Whether it's winter or summer. I do anyway.
Interestingly for me, I should probably know this. Yes. But I would normally take a vitamin D supplement in the winter, primarily because I think it's going to help my mood. I don't think I've taken it previously because of bone density, which is an oversight because, to be fair, on the box it says bone health. I was like, well, I ain't got to worry about bone health. My bones are fine, thanks very much. At 44, might not be at 74. But that, yes, go on. So you've had more exposure to sunshine than I have.
Sunlight, yeah. But I mean, Ian didn't go in the hierarchy of, so I don't know how much of that is going to be of benefit to bone health.
You also spent your first 20 years in South Africa, which was up until the point where you would generate the majority of your bone density, and you moved to the UK. So that was actually timing quite fortuitous.
Yeah, definitely. And I think having that upbringing in South Africa, I mean, very outdoor lifestyle. I grew up on what we would call a plot, which is like a small holding or a small farm in UK terms. Played outside, played all the different sports. Like sport is a huge part of South African culture. So at school from a young age, I mean, I did what he spoke about, team sports, and played pretty much all the team sports that were available. And
this piece got cut out of the initial podcast I edited incorrectly, but I did put it on social. But we had a conversation about hard feet or soft feet last time. But you also, and we didn't talk about this with Ian, but you spent a lot of time barefoot, so you haven't got nice bouncy trainers cushioning those bone yielding or bone promoting forces.
Yeah. So like very much like barefoot running.
Hobbit.
I didn't like the reference of a hobbit, Tim, because that makes people instantly think hairy feet, and I don't have hairy feet.
Brilliant.
Anyway,
okay, go on.
But seriously, so on a more serious note, so climbing trees, playing sports, team sports. So I would put my case forward from that perspective.
What's your kryptonite? I want the kryptonite though, because you have got one weakness in this bone health armor, haven't you?
I do.
Some kind of misguided belief that was inherited from your mother. What is it?
I feel like we have to start this podcast over because I'm giggling and laughing too much.
It's good. People laugh when other people laugh.
Okay. Well, like my disadvantage on that side of things was that I had probably had a lot of allergies, or my mum thought that. I was ill quite a lot with sinus.
Pretoria is quite a dusty place.
Very dusty place, especially on the very farm. Dry. Not a lot of rainfall. So I was ill a lot, and my mum had this belief, and whether that's true or not, I've not done the research, but she had the belief that dairy products was a contributor and made it worse.
Sinus. She still refers to
about sinus.
No more dairy.
So we actually stripped out dairy from my diet for a large part of my childhood, and certainly minimized it significantly, because obviously, like, stripping out completely made it quite difficult around, like, just having breakfast and those things. But we definitely reduced it quite a lot. So my only downtick is lack of calcium, but I'm hoping I had sufficient amount to not be negatively impacted by that.
We had no such concerns over dairy in my house.
No,
a lot of dairy. Good sports in terms of a rugby focus, very multi-directional, impact based, especially for someone of my stature, just getting smashed by bigger boys all the time. That sounds weird.
Okay, yes.
Not much sunshine. So I'm going to give you the win.
Okay, but also what about, I mean, Ian didn't mention anything about, like, steroids or anything like that. But
Careful now. Look at me. People are like, well, I hope not, because what are you doing with them?
Again, that sounds really bad, but you had asthma as a child. So you used a lot of your inhalers.
Yeah. I used to have these little pink pills that I used to put into water that my mum made me drink. Well, she didn't make me drink. I had to drink them. I couldn't breathe. To be fair, like, how athletically gifted I am. I started out in a stage where, honestly, like, as my mum says, I couldn't really run that far, like up the beach for wheezing. I had really bad. My mum had bad asthma. My granddad had asthma. Like, it's a hereditary thing, but I grew out of it.
Yeah.
So again, probably also a negative.
Okay.
We did have a small and interesting conversation around this. Some comment that I made around the value of rugby being impact-based sport, and you were talking about hockey, and there was some kind of confusion around getting hit in the head with a ball, which might actually be beneficial for bone density of the cranium.
No,
that's how I heard what you said to me. I was like, I'm training off concussion.
No, that's a miscommunication or misunderstanding. No, that is not what and certainly I was never hit in the head with a hockey ball.
You did the hitting often, more so. Only player to ever get sent off from Boots women's first team.
Tim.
Overly aggressive play. Anyway, right, so we've done that.
Let's not talk about the red card.
No, let's not. That's another time. Do you want to have a question, or shall I keep going? You've actually got sensible things. I've got a list of things which are not sensible.
No, okay. Well, a question. What was from what he shared? What was a standout piece of information that you did not know about?
Vitamin D and bone health, which I should have known about. I knew because I spent quite a bit of time with it. I should probably know about. Do you know what it was? It wasn't that I don't think I didn't know about it. I don't think I thought that I would have a bone density problem and therefore was attuned to the need for vitamin D supplementation. Because I would always have thought that growing up, played sport I was the most active, like, kid. I would just do anything and everything. So I've never looked at my physiology or my physical state and gone, I don't think in my mind I've got a bone density problem. I'm yet to find out. I don't know. And I would say I have bigger problems. Bones fall out of place with my dislocations, dislocated hip, dislocated shoulder. That was more of a concern rather than breaking things. So I think that was probably from the bone conversation. I've spoken to Ian before about the importance of bone loading, deformation, impact, because every time I meet with him to talk about other work, like, he updates me a little bit on the sort of stuff that he's doing around bone density. So there wasn't any massive surprises in there, which was good. I'm not sure what that noise was. But yeah, what was yours? The hip fractures was a surprise about not coming out of hospital if you fracture a hip, for 1/3 of people.
Yeah, that was quite an alarming number, really. I thought what I found really interesting was the change of direction part.
Where bone actually molds based on the stress placed upon it.
Yeah, and like, because often you think about loading, like weight training or like obviously jumping, but that like multi-directional element that he spoke about, and particularly the sharp change of direction, I was quite amazed at the amount of force that you're actually putting through. Like you said, what was it, 5 times your body weight?
Yeah. 5 to 6, I think it was.
Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting, because you can with training and in the gym or doing plyometrics, it's very controlled movements in some sense, isn't it? You're doing the repetitions very controlled, even when you're trying to be explosive with the plyometrics, where what you get with team sports or a sport like tennis, where you're moving, it's
in response to another stimulus. Yeah,
exactly.
To a visual cue,
so
effectively.
So and no movement's going to be the same and the same condition. So it's anticipating your movement based on what's happening on it by your opposition. So I thought that was really interesting.
That tickles a bias for me, though, doesn't it? For both of us, actually, in terms of all of the years I've spent in strength and conditioning. When we sat down to put our action program together, which was a design for people who had done a shoulder reconditioning program with us, that liked the style of training, and then they could continue on for a more complete approach to athleticism and athletic development, because I've been around the houses of all the different types of training. And when I come back down to sit down and go, what does a 6-week block look like, or what does a program philosophy look like? The one thing that stands true to me across everything is that athleticism is the thing that actually matters. Because even when we go to a conversation like this, well, my philosophy ticks that box from a bone health perspective. You can't say that about everything else that people might do, where we go into even something like CrossFit, which would think it's more athletic. Yes, they've got some running involved and there's some other stuff in there. But when you start to think about lateral movement or movement outside of sagittal plane and the different, like you said, the chaos of moving in response to different directions and different loading, that's where I think when we focus on how many different ways you can move in and how good you are at moving in more ways, rather than being good at moving in one way, that I've got bone health covered off with my philosophy as well. So that was like a nice affirmation for me in terms of, if you're looking for something of a holistic approach, focusing on athleticism will rarely let you down.
Yeah, definitely. And in some ways though, like, and my bias is towards playing sport. I've always struggled with just training in the gym.
You've got better at that over the years. You do now love weight. If you didn't weight train, you'd actually find that you were missing a significant part of your training week that you
this enjoy. Is true, but it's always been more with it's a means to an end, like wanting to train for hockey, doing the work in the gym so that I'm stronger, or working on power base, or being more explosive, and so that I can then apply it into my sport. And it's probably still the same now. So playing sport for me, like that, it ticks that box. But also that you can't really replicate that kind of chaos in a gym-based environment. Like there's no better way than actually going out and playing that sport.
Well, that's always been the conversation around S&C, where people have this argument around sport-specific exercises. And you go, well, there is no such thing as a sport-specific exercise. I disagree with that to a point, because there are exercises which have a better transfer of training effect into a sport from a physical preparation perspective. But trying to replicate a sport in the gym to get better at the sport is the wrong way to go about it. The best way to get good at a sport is to do the sport.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
So sports from we talked a little bit around in the podcast around swimming not being a great option, cycling not being a great option. Now, neither of us, that I've worked a lot in swimming, and we've said very early on that our kids are going to learn to swim. we're going to do almost everything we can to stop them from becoming competitive swimmers on the basis that the training volume, the training hours, and the duration of galas. I don't like sitting inside hot swimming pools for 2 days at a time. And people are like, oh, you do it there the whole time. I'm like, well, you are there quite a lot if you get quite good at swimming, or you're going backwards and forwards the whole time.
Yeah, and the training hours are really unsociable as well. Like they train late at night, early morning
before
sessions.
school, after school. Anyway,
so
the other one I thought was cycling was interesting. I reflect on this a little bit. And if you're doing road cycling, there's no bone loading. And I was like, I like riding my mountain bike now. I thought the interesting thing for that, and this would be for the mountain bike audience that are watching this, or one of two of them maybe. Because it's downhill mountain biking, you're still taking pretty big impacts. Where you are when you ride your bike like I do. Because I'm still learning. Have I explained to you what casing a jump means before?
No.
So take a normal mountain bike jump. It's built like a tabletop, right? So you've got the up ramp, a flat section, which you're supposed to jump over, and a down ramp, right? If you jump with enough speed and you don't technically make a mess of it, you should clear the flat section. And when you land on the down ramp, it's like landing on a cloud. It's like one of the best feelings. You just hit the ground and it's just so smooth. When you're not going fast enough, what happens is you're going just too fast, which means that you are sort of taking off in the air, but not with enough velocity to actually clear the flat section. So imagine going up, jumping, and then landing hard on a flat section of the table.
I'm trying to think are you talking from more experience?
Oh, this is exactly how I ride my bike. Yeah, I'm still getting brave enough to go for these bigger tables. But I was thinking about it, but I genuinely come back from a day of mountain biking feeling like I've played a game of rugby. So there must be some compressive force in there, particularly if I'm bottoming out my suspension. And it will, right now it's probably quite good for bone loading, but as I get better, it should be less effective because I should be clearing more jumps and falling off less. I told you that was niche. Some people have been like,
okay, but
they'll have done what you did in the actual podcast when you listened to the recording and Ian and I were talking about research and you were like, I switched off. You're like, you can cut all that section out because it was boring for the non-scientists in the room. That was for the non-mountain bikers, also probably boring. Anyway, I wanted to share that because I thought it was a personal reflection on my own current situation.
Okay.
The mountain bikers will know. Talk to me about any reflection on David and Goliath. That's one of the greatest stories I've ever heard. Not David and Goliath, and also the fact that it could be true that you could get knocked out if you got a thin head.
Yeah, I thought that was really insightful. Like that.
But it's interesting about gymnastics, for example.
Yeah,
like if you take it outside of a biblical story.
And also, and the information sharing around gymnastics is really helpful for us because Naomi loves gymnastics. Like she'd be there every day if she could. So it's just, she's only 4, so it's very much play. But we've got friends whose daughter does gymnastics, and what I've now coming to understand is that yes, it's an early specialization sport.
They get excited though, don't they, in gymnastics? They're like, you're only good at 4, 5, 6. Training volume just goes.
She's 5 years old and already it's been ramped up to 6 hours a week.
Yeah.
So, which when you start to actually think about it and all the skills that they're learning and having to touch on all those skills throughout the week, I can understand why that volume increases significantly, but it's just bearing that in mind for how do we mitigate against some of that.
You can, because Ian talks about this bone modeling potential that you've got, like a bucket effectively. So there's a certain amount of bone modeling that can occur, and it will go to the areas that are most in demand of it. So if you're growing and maturing, but you're under a significant amount of bone stress or bone loading stress, then that's where that bone is going to be developed, as opposed to developing from a maturation perspective. So how would you mitigate against bone loading issues to get more evenly distributed bone across the whole body if somebody's in a sport like gymnastics and they love it and they're doing it a lot? It's actually kind of like you almost can't You just have to prepare to wear a helmet when you're on everywhere you go.
I was literally thinking that. I was like, and got this visualization of Naomi in a little leotard with a scrum cap on.
This would protect your brain. Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, have you got anything else on your list? I've got one more for you. We're going to keep these a little shorter.
Okay. Well, the other thing that I thought, I'm just checking my notes here. It's quite messy actually for me. But anyway, was that he spoke about it being site-specific, a site-specific response. So I was just sort of, that got me thinking about like the conversation that you guys were having, very much around bone loading, was largely discussed around jumping, lower body activities. So, and if it's site-specific response, like I was then starting to think, what does that mean for the rest of your body? Like, what does that do for your spine and particularly then upper body? Because we don't train the upper body as much from an explosive perspective, and certainly as a child, you're not like you're running, you're jumping, you're changing direction, all those things. But how does that transfer from into your spine and upper body?
I thought about this too, because you mentioned it to me, and I thought I need to just kind of have a good response for you on this. So,
see, I was kind. I prepared you.
You know, I like this. I like the element of surprise in my notes. Okay, so I think from a priority perspective, and if we just think about function as a human being, and we'll come to the shoulder in a second, your legs are designed to carry you about the place. So they're designed for mobility, for walking, for running, for function, for survival, effectively. So because of how we use them, it's obviously therefore going to be important that we develop bone density in the lower body to protect against things like hip fractures when we get older, because as soon as you can't walk, you have run into a problem. Now, and probably, I don't know the rates, but if you look at fractured or shoulder fractures versus hip fractures in older population, you will get people who fall over and fracture a shoulder, for example, some bone around the upper arm. But I thought that the important part around that, it's very easy to load the lower body, and the risk of a bone fracture in the lower body is probably, my guess would be greater than the upper body for most people. So it's very easy to do, and it's probably a higher level of risk, and also the impact of having a fracture in the lower body is probably greater. So I kind of thought around it from that perspective. Then I thought, well, when we're jumping and loading, forces are going to be transferred up the spine, have to be, because we're going to absorb forces. So, and we know that from research, it would suggest that of how we land, the forces that are experienced in the lumbar spine, thoracic spine, whatever, you can kind of measure those. So from a vertebrae perspective, I think as well, if we're loading, twisting, turning, jumping, being athletic, I don't think we'll have a problem. And then I also, when I listened back to it, Ian had mentioned around some of the studies when he was talking about stress fractures, but tennis players will have typically more bone density in their forearms and their playing hand than their non-playing hand. So even though it's not necessarily impact, more use of the limb is going to, over time, result in more bone density development. So I thought about that, and I was like, as long as it comes back to, again, that idea of, are we using the body in different ways to do different things, and the upper body will respond. Because he also mentioned around remember the child archers? When they used to be so they would then find these skeletons of the archers who were kids, and they would have one scapula bigger than the other because they would have done so much of repetitive loading. So even though it's not impact, still loading the bone is going to create stronger bones. So I think there's that side of things where, what are we doing functionally? And again, it just comes back to that physical literacy during those early years for me. And if we've talked about the importance of being in a sport or an activity where we are exposing ourselves to these kind of forces that are required, but that should also be upper and lower body predominantly, if we're going for kind of the complete picture of robustness and resilience against bone-related health issues later in life. But then when we start to get into plyometrics in the upper body, well, why not? Why would we not get better at falling? I mean, this is, to be fair for you, you've got history here. 2 broken wrists from snowboarding. Never did any falling over when you were a kid in terms of like contact sports, because I don't think rugby was the thing for girls, was it, in South Africa in the 1990s?
But I did play a bit of rugby in primary school.
And you threw a javelin, and you're quite good at that too.
Yes, I did javelin. Obviously, lots of tennis.
So so you're right, but you have fractured your right wrist. So
yes, I did. Yeah.
But anyway, I don't know that we can. I think it just comes down to when for me, if I look at it and go, when we've got the opportunity to work with kids in a developing phase of their life, it brings back that whole importance of generalism over specialism, and making sure that we are exposing them to a movement-focused environment that covers lots of different things and just helps them to because if they're building physical literacy and we're doing that under appropriate loads, then we're doing probably as good a job as we can. And as Ian said, you don't need a huge amount of repetition.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be lots to stimulate bone density development. So I think activity, movement, function, play, exploration of different environments and how we can move in sports and everything, I think it's just more is more. Yeah. Ultimately, you're going to get to a stage where kids are going to want to specialize, or they're going to choose their sport. But you've got until 20 to kind of like. But then again, strength and conditioning is such an important part. Particularly in awareness, if you're going, well, you're choosing a sport where you aren't necessarily going to be getting the bone density development by nature of the sport, the strength and conditioning program, physical preparation program becomes even more important, because that is an opportunity where you can do those things. I'll stop talking in a second, but the final thing on this is Ian's made a great point of going, it's just not that sexy. Like bone loading, people aren't thinking about on their watch. They'll go, how many steps we've done. They're not thinking about how much bone loading they've done in a day. I think we've got some way to go before the physical training landscape, both in the sports context and just in activity, understands this subject and the importance of it, because it's something that's going to happen down the road. I'll worry about that in 20 or 30 years.
Not thinking about it right now.
Too late.
Yeah.
It's too late at that point. But people have got to open up to more generalism in their training. They've got to get away from the specialism, and that takes you away from maybe being good at one thing, because you actually need to be good at a lot of different things to do a really good job of this. And how important is it? Well, we probably don't know at this stage, but your opportunity to change that and to not find out how important it is to be proactive at this early age of your life and your maintenance phase, because you are offsetting the risk or mitigating against the risk of a problem in the latter stages of your life. That was a monologue. All right? What do you think?
Yeah, well, and I think, obviously we've kept the conversation, because it's now, we've got kids, so we want to make sure that their first 20 years of their life, we can have an impact on these things and have this now in mind as we raise them. And for those who don't have kids, and also like us in our later stages, around like what can we do to maintain what we have, right? I think that was the key message from that perspective, is like we can't go back now and back to childhood and reclaim things there, but what we have and how can we. And particularly, this kind of brings me on to another question for you, is around, so take someone 35 plus age who perhaps didn't have a particularly active lifestyle being when they were younger, but also perhaps not that active now because of life commitments and work and all these things. Where would, because Ian spoke about progressive overload or progression, periodization. Now that's really in your space as well. Where would you start?
Yeah, it's interesting because he did make that point around if you can't ski, don't take it up, because you're going to be at risk of falling. But if you're a proficient skier, keep going. So as you were talking, the straight away the thing said to me, well, if you were in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and your question is, what do I do now? Well, your job is to maintain, because its bone density is going to decline. So the job is to try and stop the rate and speed of that decline as much as you can. Yeah. And because we can't develop new bone in this chapter of our lives, it's all about how do I start to load that bone in ways which is going to keep what I've got. So it's a damage limitation, essentially. So with that, if you are an active person, like I'm in a fairly good stage from a training perspective, I can go and pick up a new sport like touch rugby, and I can go and tick that box, and I'll feel pretty good doing it because I've earned the right to be able to, because I've kept my training going. If you've come from a stage where training has been fairly what's the right word here? If you're coming from a place where I've only just done like bodybuilding, for example, and I haven't moved or sprinted or anything, I haven't done anything sort of dynamic for years or athletic for years, then it is about that shift of training and mindset. And Ian made some really good points of saying, actually, you can just do like drop landings. So you on the holding the back of two chairs to drop yourself down and start to just get the bone forces. Now, people in their 30s and 40s will be much more able to do more than that. That's not necessarily talking about a complete elderly population. But you're starting to go, well, how do I become more athletic? And you can always do that. You start by building more single leg stand stability. Can I stand on one leg? Can I do more single leg exercises in the gym? Strength training, he said, is going to be beneficial. It's not as good as plyometrics, but we need to be building back into those kind of exercises where we have got the balance and the stability and the control to be able to then go and introduce plyometric exercises safely and progressively. And once you get onto that trajectory, then you're actually in a great space because you can hop sideways, front to back, change direction. There's loads that you can do, as he said, from a bone loading perspective in the gym. You just don't necessarily get the chaos and the complete kind of like, as you mentioned, there's different directions and bone modeling that you're going to get from a sports-based environment where you are being much more reactive.
But perhaps that's also a better place to start, right? Being in a more controlled environment, because I mean, one of my friends just recently, it was celebrating a 40th birthday, and they had a.
She might listen to this.
Paddle, I don't know how people pronounce it. Paddle, whatever, party and she got injured. Like she, and
was it Achilles?
I think it was an Achilles. I'll have to double check that. But she got injured and got hurt because
calf tear
haven't been playing sports in that sense for probably a few years. Swimmer in her case, but that aside, going from not that into a bit more chaotic environment where you have to respond is perhaps better to start, to your point, in a more controlled environment in the gym where you can have control over the height of the plates or box that you're jumping off. You can do the land and hold.
I think it's an interesting thing about getting older, though, isn't it? Because you think people, as we said in the last one, people have this reference point back in their mid-20s of how I used to be able to I could just go and pick up a tennis racket and play tennis.
Go and play.
But if you've actually deconditioned over those years and then you go back into a sports environment, the risk of injury is way higher than it was when you were 20. And then also the recovery process is maybe going to be a little bit difficult for a number of different reasons. You've lost, to a point, you're deconditioned, plus bodies are changing. It's harder to kind of shake those kind of or to be resilient against those kind of injuries. But I don't think that people want to do the work. I think if you go, right, you want to go and play padel, whatever it is, well, you should probably get back in the gym before you start thinking about that. You just go, I'm just going to play cricket on the beach, or I'm going to sprint my kids or whatever. I'm just going to go for a run. And all of a sudden you've got an injury. And then what happens? Well, you've now got to rehabilitate that injury. And are you going to rush back to that sport after you've had an injury like that? Probably not. So you're starting to decrease your sphere of exposure to the things which are good for you, because that circle just becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. What are the things that I can do? And you hear that all the time with people when they start to get to that stage. Their options are so limited. I can't ski, I can't do this, can't do that, can't do that. So you end up with this just like walking or whatever it might be, that you go, I just walk. And we say that that's not a good stimulus from in relation to this conversation. So I think it's my bias, but preserving athleticism. And I've said for years, like, life gets pretty miserable when you can't move anymore, and you maintain movement by moving. So when you get out of the stage where you kind of want to pick up heavy weights and you're into kind of clanging and banging bars in the gym and maybe a a sports focused time in your life is finished, where you go, I'm not going to play rugby anymore because I can't be banged up all week at 35, 40 years old. At that point, what do? You become a generalist and you train everything.
Yeah, and the most important thing I think is not to stop.
Yeah.
And I think that's the story that I see with my family, with my mum and my dad both. They stopped playing tennis. My dad stopped playing squash.
Life got busy.
Life got really busy. And it's always that, oh, I'll do it when, right? And life didn't slow down. You think, oh, when it slows down a bit, then I want to get back to the gym, or I'm going to go back to playing some sport. And I think it's realizing, I mean, and that, well, that was true for them anyway, that life didn't quieten down, and he didn't go back to playing squash, and then the ailments kick in, and you're getting older,
Squash
and
great
you get deconditioned. And then, like, to your point, like, it's really hard, like, doing that work. Like, I remember I could, early on with the pregnancy, with Naomi, I was like so adamant, yeah, I'm going to keep running. And I just couldn't, like, my body couldn't cope with that. And I did less and less training because, to my point earlier about, I found just training in the gym quite hard, because for me it was always a means to an end as to it's going to be better for my sport. So I didn't do much in my pregnancy with Naomi, as much as I probably could have done. And then getting back into training once she was born was really difficult, and it was really hard work, because I had to put a lot of effort into it, and it wasn't pretty. It felt awful, and in my mind I was like, I just want to be where I was, and I had to do the work to get there, and that is really difficult.
To get back to a place where you felt like, you know what, I feel like I'm back to a place where I feel pretty good in my skin or my body?
It took a few months. I would say at least 6 months before I started feeling like, yeah. And then, you know, and
but you were
I had other chat
about it.
I was, and I wanted to get back into playing hockey again, and I didn't want to get injured playing hockey, so I knew it was important to get ready before I went back onto a hockey pitch.
Yeah.
So yes, you know, and to your point, you've got to. There's no easy win. There's no magic pill. You've got to do the work.
Make time. Have a focus.
So, final question from me is then: so taking all that information, what are you going to, if you had one thing, or it could be two, what would you take to implement? Or continue doing, because you say, yes, I'm ticking that box?
Well, I think if I look back, because my strength and conditioning career became all-encompassing, as I have a tendency to do.
Yeah.
So strength and conditioning training became the thing, and that's good from an athletic perspective. I also had a significant period of my 30s where I did predominantly calisthenics. So there have been some good upper body bone density development during that phase, because the forces involved are significant. But I didn't do a lot of lower body plyometric work, change of direction work. I was running a little bit, but not really consistently. There was no sports during that time. So I lost a little bit there, potentially. So I think having gone back to sport now, and it's easy to, people have said, oh, you should keep playing and stuff. And I just didn't. I had single focus. But I think now, like, I really do feel that generalism is the way to go. And what I love seeing down at Touch Rugby is that there are guys down there that are in their 50s and probably their 60s. And it's just that you've got a sport there where all of the things I like, I mean, you could do the same at hockey. I think that's one of the great things about hockey is the Masters probably goes up to about over 70s, doesn't it? Like, you know, proper old people.
Hey, careful.
And tennis is the same. Like, I went down to watch Jack play tennis, and there's some doubles, mixed doubles playing, and these guys are all 60s and 70s. If one guy maybe a little bit further on than that, and they're not that agile around the court anymore, but they're out there doing something. If the ball goes to them a little bit outside of their reach, that ball's going, and that's the point. Like, I ain't moving. But I love the idea of continuing that exposure to sport. I think there must be. I don't know if you told me this, but I would imagine that the life expectancy of people when they're involved in those kind of sports and activities and a community, and they've got something, and I don't think it's probably got anything to do with like how strong they're getting. And I just think that is the way to get old well. Is to keep, as you say, just don't stop, but become more generalist as you get older. Like you've had your window of specialism, like a gymnast, going back to that. They're done and dusted by 20 years old, most of them. What do you do now? Whereas I think you've had that window of specialism where I was a rugby player. The path to a wonderful old age is broadening out the things that I can do within the interests and the things that I enjoy. More is more in that sense. Just do more things, more often, more different ways. Yeah. Don't stop. Would you like to answer that question back? I'm conscious of time. Do you want to what would you take away? You should probably answer that question. I've got one left, but it's probably a bit boring because it's about research.
Yeah, we can scrap that one.
That's one of my questions. What are you taking away?
I think you and Ian spoke about research.
Yeah, plenty long enough. Crikey, it went on. Yawn. I'm only going to stop talking about papers and publications. But go on then.
Well, I feel not to be smug.
You haven't stopped, have you?
I haven't, but also I feel like so I've moved from hockey to tennis, and I feel like I'm pretty happy with my choice from that perspective. I mean, for a number of reasons, but particularly now after this conversation you had with Ian around bone health. But I also really like it because you've definitely got multi-directional elements in there.
Visual stimulus.
It's visual. You have
reaction times.
Yeah, and
play this game. All the good things about tennis. Whiffing and waffing.
But you're also using, like, it's very much a balanced sport from a upper body, lower body perspective. Also left to right handed. So yeah, I feel like
you're in it.
I'm in it. I'm ticking this box. The one thing I definitely want to is the vitamin D, though. I feel like that is one area that I would need to be more consistent with that, because I don't think even in the summer months or when it should be lighter that we're getting enough vitamin D. So
just keep going.
So I'll just keep going with the vitamin D year round.
It's true, because like even though the sun's shining outdoors, most of us are indoors most of the time.
Yeah.
So you're still not getting exposure to the sunshine as much as you probably should. Right, I'll scrap my final question about research. Probably not that interesting anyway, because most people aren't going to go and sit and read through published papers.
So I've not got much to add to that one.
So all I was going to ask you about that was, let's do a real quick one to wrap this one up. Do you find, as a non-scientific person, do you find it difficult to discern good information from bad? Because we're exposed to, if there's someone that a piece of content that you come across, it's quite easy to be influenced by, how often do we start sentences? I've seen this thing on social.
Yeah, I think, okay, I'm pretty lucky because I'm married to you. So you do a lot of the research for me in that sense. So I know I can trust when you say something is good or something is reputable or it's a person worth listening to, then I trust you.
You didn't like it when I critiqued Mel Robbins' podcast, did you?
No, I did.
That was a trigger, wasn't it?
That was a trigger. I like Mel Robbins.
She wasn't quite right about training. Well, it wasn't even Mel. It was just a mate.
No, she had a guest. But to your point that you've said before, like when you have a guest on a podcast, you're inviting them. So would it be right for her to critique or argue? Yeah. Like even if it is, so you're bringing someone in that's perceived as an expert. So, but I do think, and to that point, I take information from people that I trust.
That's exactly where I was going to go.
So it's if it's a friend who's recommending something, then I would be more inclined to also then, yes, make your own judgments, but instantly that runs a few points doesn't it?
I think you're a good critical thinker, though. For a non-scientist, you're quite good at critical thinking. You'll often look to evaluate and review something and make your own opinion about it, some of which are often quite aggressive, passionate.
Wow.
Is that fair?
Look, I'm South African, so sometimes it comes across aggressive, and it's not really meant that way.
But there are, for anybody listening or watching this, as Corin becomes more comfortable with this format, expect more venom in her opinions. But no, you are good, and we critically evaluate a lot because we talk all the time. But yeah, I was going to say that same thing. I think the key for it is because most people haven't got time to go to the research publications and read papers. They don't understand what they say most of the time anyway. And it's difficult to go through that whole process of discerning what is a good research paper, who's a trusted author, all the stuff that Ian spoke about. So I think you've got to go and be very careful of the sources that you listen to. And you need to go through a critical review process of going, is that somebody who I think is trustworthy? Are they trying to sell something off the back of it, and they are using research to back up their viewpoint or to make an argument for them? Are they looking at they're well-rounded in their presentation of information? Does it make sense? I think there's a little bit, and when you find those people, like, go with them, because if they are seen to be trustworthy, there's always going to be a little bit of just being somewhat holding on to some level of skepticism. You don't really believe everything that somebody says, because they'll also have their own biases. But having a number of different trusted sources, which covers the landscape that you're interested in, and maybe sometimes opening yourself out to people that you don't necessarily agree with in the process for the purpose of trying to find out what you don't know. But I think particularly when everybody's got an agenda in terms of what they're communicating and how they're communicating it, science is supposed to be the independent variable within that, but even that's biased. So it is massively difficult, as Ian said, but I think finding out and getting a group of people that you go to and go, okay, I can trust what's coming out of their channel or their...
Yeah, and use a bit of common sense, I think, as well with that. Like, does it make, like, to your point, does it make sense? And if it makes sense to me, then, you know, whether it's backed up by science, I guess it doesn't really matter too much to me sometimes, depending on what the information is that I'm looking at. But like, if it makes sense to me and it feels good for me, then I'm happy to apply that to my life.
Mm-hmm. I think the part of that is if you hear something and then you think, oh, that sounds quite good, like I'm gonna give that some attention. What we'll often find is if you're aware to those kind of good sources I mentioned before, those people at some point you may well find they'll publish or share a research paper which evidences the same subject area. So cold water immersion is an example of this, hypertrophy example of some of these people that I kind of follow. There are people who have an opinion, and then what happens is often as we do an elite sport, what we're doing at the sharp end of that spectrum is stuff which hasn't been researched yet, because if it's been researched and the rest of the world is doing it, and we're constantly looking for those progressions in performance. So we might be trying something out, which then kind of becomes part of the mainstream conversation, which then gets researched, which then gets evidenced, and then people will do independent studies to validify it effectively, or validate.
Yes.
Explore, examine, investigate. And then you go, okay, this thing that I thought is actually working. Or some people will have seen cold water immersion as a good example, and then they've seen that they've actually shown that it has potentially blunts the hypertrophy response. So if you're trying to build muscle mass and then you jump straight into cold water after your session, you might be decreasing the potential adaptation you're going to get. So you're always thinking, right, okay, well, now I've learned something new. I'm not going to do that when my goal is hypertrophy. So it is this dynamic pursuit of knowledge, I think, and just being aware that needs to shift. You cannot you see these people that just become super dogmatic about one thing and aren't open to anything else. You're like, you've lost your way. Sensible and playful, Corin. Playful at the beginning, sensible in the second half. I haven't got anything more playful to finish off with, I'm afraid. I haven't got an out.
Well,
apart from going back to my follow-through joke, but we probably did that to death at the beginning.
Yeah.
Happy?
Well, we'll see what the output is when we watch it back.
The critical evaluation of your own performance.
The critical evaluation as to whether we need to do a retake.
I haven't got time. One shot. One take, Tony. Right, that was the end of whatever this is called. The follow-through.
No. critical review.
The dynamic follow through.
The dynamic review.
The pursuit of a follow through. No, can't make it
Okay, I
work.
think you should stop now.
Right.
Great. Thanks very much.
Oh,
I think.
Thanks. Thanks for coming.
That's what you do at the end of a podcast, isn't it?
I was just gonna let that fade out naturally. You've made it awkward now. We need some kind of sign off, don't we?
Oh yeah. Do we need a sign off?
That's not cheesy. Anyway, we'll be back with another one of these after we've spoken to somebody else to debrief. Actually, in advance, the next conversation coming out is with Phil Looney.
Ooh.
There was some good stuff in that one that I'm going to bring in. I've got a great idea that I'm not sharing with you. How something that I want to pick up on what Phil said. I'm already plotting to the playful side. That one I think is more playful than sensible. We'll see. Because I can pick up on all of your bad habits and share them with the world.
Okay, so you're going to be smug in the next one, are you?
I don't.
It's your turn.
I don't know. Yeah. You just got better sleep. Anyway, we're spoiling that one. We'll be back in a week or so. Thanks for listening.